going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls commentary. Alright guys, so this is going to be a short video. I just want to have a brief talk about parrying and at least my experiences. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of players saying that, they can't identify with what I'm saying. Okay, but I'm just talking about my own experiences. Parrying to me really seems to be not reliable, right? Now, I do get a lot of parries. I get a lot of parries, but they really seem unreliable, at least in my experiences, especially during random invasions. And this is what I'm thinking. Now, I already know there's going to be some of these Reddit scientists, those guys on Reddit will break down the molecule, right? They have a solution for everything. And perhaps they have an explanation that I'm just not aware of. Okay. So in the event that we have one of these, gaming technicians who's ready to break down, every aspect of the frame and, the window and the timing and the shield and every, all those little technical things. Okay, I already know somebody's going to do it. Okay, but I'm not aware of any of that. I'm just a noob, right? So we're just going to talk from what you might call layman's perspective. I'm not one of these technical dudes on Reddit posting all these scientific explanations for shit. Shout out to Reddit. But anyway, this is what I'm thinking. So in Dark Souls 1, in order to be successful, you had to initiate a parry just before a weapon attack, right? And a lot of players, they said it was laggy because on your screen you had to parry before, and oftentimes what you were parrying on your screen was your shield in the open position was actually parrying, not the back of a shield like we have in Dark Souls 3. It was actually the shield in the open position. So if you really want to look at it, you're holding a shield with your arm, your forearm. Your forearm was basically parrying the weapon, which is weird because it should have lobbed that shit off, right? If this was real, it should just lob it off, parrying your forearm, against a claymore. That makes no sense, but that's how it was. So on your screen, that's what you had to do. On the person who got parried on their screen, it was on time, So there was a lot of things in Dark Souls 1 that accounted for latency, adjusted for the differences in latency between one player and another. But in Dark Souls 3, they want it to look more tight on everybody's screen. So if you notice, when you're parrying on Dark Souls 3, you're actually parrying the weapon and not, necessarily having to, initiate a parry before an attack. Now, there are some cases where I have parried slightly before an attack and I still got it off. But see, I don't know if that's the parry window of the particular shield that I was using or what. But in most cases, I'm actually parrying with the shield. So what I'm thinking is the system in Dark Souls 1 may have, even though it looked worse, because like I said before, on the person who's parrying screen, you had to parry before. But if you were the one getting parried, it looked perfect. It looked like your weapon got parried the way it should. I think that way of doing things accounted for a lot of the what you might call lag or latency between players. I think that was actually good for accounting for the latency, which is why, at least at my personal experiences, parrying was far more reliable. Now, there were some super extreme cases, and I mean one of the outliers, a small percentage of instances where you could not parry someone. I mean, their connection was just absolutely shit. There were some cases, but I'm willing to say at least 80% of the time, right? And that's just giving it the benefit of the doubt. 80 to 90% of the time in Dark Souls 1, if the conditions were there, you were able to successfully parry. I don't care what the weapon was. May it be a falchion, may it be a claymore, may it be a Zweihander, which is, and we're not talking about, some of these pros who's dead angling. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about two players locked onto each other, R1 spamming or something similar. 9 times out of 10, you would get the parry off. So it was extremely reliable in that game. Because, like I said, I'm thinking. I know the technician's going to check the video and check what I'm saying and break it down, from one element to another. I know it's coming. But that's what I'm thinking. On this game, though, it seems as though they wanted to tighten it up for everybody, right? So they wanted to tighten up the animation and the response on your screen, as well as, have it reflect on your opponent's screen. The downside to that is that by tightening up the pairing in this game, it seems like it's a lot more difficult to account for latency. The so-called laggy parries before accounted for a lot of it, whereas in this game, if there's a lot of latency between you and another player, at least in my experiences, pairing will not be reliable. Now, there's some factors out there that you should account for. Number one, maybe your parry timing was off. Maybe your timing is always off. Okay. Maybe let's think of some other factors. Maybe you're playing on a wireless connection, okay, against another player on a wireless connection. There could be a slew of factors. But guess what, noobs? In Dark Souls 1, I played wireless. I played wireless all throughout Dark Souls 1. And, I do understand that your connection is not as good with wireless. But I never had this many issues with pairing in Dark Souls 1 as I have in Dark Souls 3. Never. And I think the so-called laggy parries is what explains it. Now, I no longer play wireless, because for some of you guys to kind of follow, I got a wired connection shortly after PS4, because I was a Killzone Shadowfall fanatic. And I was noticing that I was kind of, losing a lot when I was wireless, and then I, just got to educate myself and watching videos, and I realized that it was best because up to that point I didn't really play shooters. Up to that point, Killzone 2, Killzone 3 were the only shooters that I played. I didn't like Call of Duty. I wasn't a Battlefield fanboy. Although those games are, they're good for their communities, I wasn't into those games. But the Killzone franchise, I absolutely love to this day. And even now, I hope they come up with another Killzone installment. Okay, but I don't want to do that. So, I didn't, get a wired setup until I started playing Killzone. And I dramatically noticed the difference. So I understand the difference between a wired and wireless connection. But, bruh, I'm wired right now. And so I don't think it's the connection. What I really think is, them wanting to tighten up how pairing looked from the person who is pairing, from that person's perspective. I think they wanted to tighten it up so it doesn't look so weird. But in doing that, I really think you can no longer account for the latency between players. Because now, let me give you an example. So all the pros, they'll tell you that the best way to deal with R1 spamming, with in particular the Dark Sword. I don't have that much of a problem with the slower weapons, but in particular the faster swinging weapons, at least for me, is extremely inconsistent. So I'm talking about long swords. I don't really run into rapiers that often anymore. But there's some times when I'm doing random invasions and I run into a R1 spamming S-Stock or some other type of rapier. Those super fast swinging weapons, at least for me, it's really inconsistent. Because they always say, well, hey, I mean, just tank 2 hits and parry the third. I have done that so many times, countless times. And you want to know what ended up happening? I will end up getting a partial. And as a result of getting a partial and that person's still swinging, because those weapons take a small amount of stamina. It consumes a small amount of stamina per swing. So they could just keep swinging. So I'll take 2 hits, get a partial on the third, frustrated, that I missed it. And then after I get that partial, they're still swinging. So that's another 2 hits. In a lot of cases, that's 900 damage. And after doing that enough times, I'm like, okay, this shit is not reliable. I don't know if this is a reliable way to deal with it. So in most cases, when I run into a player like that, in most cases, I'll just either shield up or after the 2 hits, I'll just back off. Because it's better to eat 2 hits than it is to eat 900 damage. So perhaps there's an explanation out there. This is just my own experience. And this is in particular the fast swinging weapons. Some of the smaller curved swords, long swords, all those weapons that swing super fast. Now, all these other weapons I have no issue with. The twin blades, claymores, some of these others. So like in the instances of those smaller weapons, I think there's not really that much of an issue of latency. But because these smaller weapons swing so fast. Now, keep in mind, there could be some players who are unlocking when they're R1 swing. But you can kind of tell that too. Because you can notice how, they're no longer facing you. You're trying to parry, but they're facing to the left and right. In a lot of cases at 90 degrees. So you can even tell that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you're fighting noobs and they're locked on, coming at you with a frenzy. It's really inconsistent for me. So I love to hear some of you guys' experience. That's my only explanation. That's the only thing that I can come up with, is by tightening up how parries look on your end, on the player's end. It's a lot more difficult to account for the latency, which is why in a lot of cases when you're fighting these faster swinging weapons, at least for me, parrying is just not reliable. Okay, so love to hear your comments. Love to hear what you got to say. So hey, until next time, Martyr's Brigade is out.